Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraud bringing you Capitalism Hits Home, a podcast produced by Democracy at Work. If you go to democracyatwork.info, you'll find all sorts of interesting things. You'll learn a lot and hopefully be entertained. At any rate, today I want to talk about another element of how personal life and the economy and the social mores and cultural forces of a society shape one another. I want to talk about the big question that I am actually appalled by, which is, what are the strengths, skills, and knowledges that one gets from traditional women's labor? Caring for lives, caring particularly for vulnerable lives of children and infants, and creating order and cleanliness. All of those are things without which humans won't live. And yet, they're not even mentioned as skills and knowledges. So when women go back to work after staying home and taking care of households and children, they can't enumerate the skills that they've learned because they're not even conscious skills that are not even explained, no less rewarded and well paid. This begins in infancy. If a baby, an infant, is not picked up and cuddled and talked to, does not have an affectionate, warm interaction with caregivers, that infant won't thrive. There's a disease called failure to thrive, which happens to infants who aren't picked up and talked to and interacted with. They get a disorder. They can't learn to turn over, to sit up, to talk, and eventually they die. Because people need caring in order to live. And yet these skills of caring are discounted. Why? That's the question. Why aren't they considered important? Well, that has a lot to do with the devaluation of women. Because these skills and knowledges that are developed and handed down from mother to child, since we do not have child development courses that are required in our schools, these skills have been attributed not to skill, knowledge, but to instinct, as if we can be counted, we as women, among non-human animals. I encountered this truth quite dramatically. It was in 1969, when in the early women's liberation movement, when me and Naomi Weinstein, a mathematician, feminist who made models of the brain, debated with members of the Yale anthropology department, Yale University. And they had the Yale anthropologists had the first chance to talk, and they tried to establish that women are just like our ape ancestors who care for their infants out of instinct. And Naomi Weinstein answered them, and she was a very down-to-earth woman from Brooklyn, and she said, "Oh, for God's sakes, you have your monkeys. We could pull out our monkeys. It's not about monkeys. It's about people." They had nothing to say because they weren't used to that discourse, but it brought a rise out of the audience. At any case, when children are born, their brains are about this size, about the size of a small fist. By the time humans die, their brains are about the size of a Nerf football, like this. And the volume of those brains are filled by neuronal connections, neurons firing. And those neurons fire out of emotion and social connection. We are social animals from biology of the brain on up. And so the idea that women's care for children or homes is an instinctual activity that doesn't have to be counted, looked at, or remunerated is a chauvinist falsehood, and we have to challenge it. So what do you learn from taking care of a vulnerable life? Let's start with a baby. What do you learn? Well, the first thing you learn is empathy. Infants can't talk. Mothers, because people who care for infants are overwhelmingly mothers, have to feel what the child communicates. They have to feel it sensually, in the feeling of the child's body, visually, in watching the child's body react, and in noting the emotions that the child is expressing. Daniel Stern, a psychiatrist, was a pioneer in infant-mother interaction and psychiatry. He wrote a book called The First Relationship, which is a very good book. And the people who were his patients were mothers and children who weren't bonding. And what he taught them is he taught the mothers how to sensually understand their child, how to, when they hold their child, feel if the child body is stiffening because of something in the parent. If the child is drawing away or crying, how the child is signaling they need space. They want to be approached carefully and not grabbed. And he taught mothers the skills of interpreting their children's nonverbal behavior. I think he got interested in this because when he was a young child of about 2, his mother's father died and his mother did not speak for a whole year. So he had to watch her and pick up her signs as well as she watch him and pick up his. Because by the time a child is 3 months old, that child can notice the narrowing of a parent's pupils in anger and become alarmed. Because children are very attuned to their caregivers. And sometimes the ambivalence of a caregiver frightens a needy child because they are emotional beings. And women, one of the strengths and learnings that women can get from caring for vulnerable lives is empathy, meeting other people's needs. You can see that if you walk down a crowded street, as I do in Manhattan. The people more likely to say, "Excuse me," if they're in the way, or move out of the way, are invariably women. It's men who are what they call man-spreading on the subway, spreading their legs out, spreading their arms out, and taking up 3 seats. It's called man-spreading because women don't do that. We've been taught to respect other lives and notice those lives around them, a very important skill and knowledge. The majority of managers in the United States are now women. And they're women because in management, you really don't need testosterone-infused aggression. What you really need is the ability to understand people and negotiate differences between them so that they can get along together. If you are a caregiver for a young child, usually it's a mother, you also learn the differentness of people, the differentness of their needs from yours. So, for example, if you need to walk out the door and you need to wash the children's sticky hands and face before you leave, You learn that you need to get out the door, but as soon as you have soap and water and bubbles, the child needs to play and splash and feel the water and feel the soap and have a process experience rather than a goal. You also learn to interpret their needs, all of their other needs. So, for example, when my children were going through potty training and toilet training, their great interest when we took a walk was inspecting the dog crap, stopping at each dog crap and admiring it and discussing it because they were very involved with trying to control going to the potty. And that's that's an important lesson, that these children's lives and development is different from ours, and that we need to respect that. I remember that when my son was going through potty training at his nursery school, he came home one day and said, "Jason did a dog duty under the jungle gym." I asked the nursery school teacher about it, and a child had laid a turd under the jungle gym, and my son had no way of conceptualizing that, except no, only dogs do that. People don't do that. And that was learned from a mother who explained. You learn how to understand that people are different from you as they're growing up. Their minds work differently. And so you have to adjust your communication to the level that a developing child can understand it. I remember when I was a teacher of young children who were in kindergarten, I wanted to teach the concept of infinity. And so I brought in very crumbly cookies and jars so that they could roll the cookies out and explain, if we try to count the cookie crumbs, there's more. Just imagine endless cookie crumbs everywhere. That's infinity. It goes on forever. Imagine that. They got the idea. But I could convert it into terms that a child can understand. And I have found in dealing with children, they can understand anything if you explain it in terms that respect where they are intellectually. Also, you need to learn, and you do learn, how to negotiate, particularly with 2-year-olds who are learning to say no, to differentiate themselves from their parents, and how to work around that so that there isn't a power struggle. I remember with my daughter, if she didn't want to go home from the wonderful childcare that she had, she would say to me, "I don't want to go home. I hate you." And I would say, "That's okay, darling. I hate you too sometimes." And she'd put her hand in mine. But if I'd had a big struggle about hatred and don't you dare say that, we would have had a lot of trouble. And her daycare provider, who was amazing, would say, "You could stay to dinner. We're having liver and sauerkraut," knowing that all kids hate those things, because she could understand where the child was coming from and adjust her communication. That's another really important knowledge, how to adjust your pace and your understanding to the people around you. Now, I'm just touching the surface here, because these knowledges, A, haven't been developed, and B, I don't have time to develop it further here. I want to create the question, why haven't we valued these things, since life depends on it and our lives depend on it? The second thing to think about is why haven't we developed the skills that go into cleanliness and creating order, without which we wouldn't live? If you go into a hospital, it's immaculate, because if they left crap around, people would get infections. And yet the janitor at the hospital is paid very poorly. He's doing a job that women do, cleaning up, without respect to the importance of that job to the whole operation. People who care for cleaning up, whether they're janitors or nurses' aides, or the kind of laundresses, and that's a female, laundry workers, or home health aides, who are about the lowest paid employees, even though they're caring for very vulnerable lives of older people. Their skills are devalued, and not only devalued, they're erased. Now, another skill that women learn, particularly mothers learn, is how to socially organize their families. Women are not only usually the social organizers that arrange when to have relatives over, when to schedule a party or a celebration of a holiday. They also arrange the social networks of their children, their play dates, their PTA meetings, their crucial things they have to bring to school and when, often their homework. I remember a client of mine who was an OxyContin addict. She told me, I have to take OxyContin. Last night at 9:00 at night, my daughter told me, oh, tomorrow's Valentine's Day. I need Valentines for my whole class. She said, if I weren't on Oxy, I would have freaked out. As it is, I said, okay, sweetheart, we'll go to the all-night drugstore. They have Valentines. I could do it. I could adjust to her schedule. I could socially organize it so she could go into school prepared. But unfortunately, she could do it only when drugged. That's an enormous amount of work and time and thought that goes into social organization. And also organization of and preparation of meals, which are a social occasion in most families. Now, what can we do about that? Well, one thing we could do is teach child development, starting in high school. I remember one lesson, which was a valuable lesson, of taking care of infants, where every student got a heavy bag of flour, at least 5 pounds, between 5 and 10 pounds. And we opened it at the top, and that bag of flour was their infant, and they couldn't spill any of it, and they had to hold it with them the whole day. That was a lesson in the care it takes to take care of a vulnerable life. But child development should be part of every curriculum. People can learn how they developed and also can learn the skills of caring for other people. They also should read children's literature, because those books get across very complicated concepts in terms that children can understand, so they can learn that to communicate with people, you need to take cognizance of what their level of intellectual development is that you are learning in school. Why haven't these obvious things that are crucial to life, why haven't they been learned? Well, capitalism devalues anything that doesn't make a profit, or at least doesn't have a profit in sight. You don't make money off of having children and bringing them up. It doesn't pay money. And therefore, it's not interesting to capitalists. Also, the skills one gets of empathy, of feeling for people, and respecting their needs is not useful if you plan to exploit people, have them work for you, and get as little money as you can give them as possible, and take the most for yourself. And children have to learn both the skills of taking care of one another and being considerate, which they learn in nursery school and kindergarten, but also to adjust. There's a good children's book by Laurie Siegel, good children's writer, who writes about a conflict in the sandbox where a little child is playing with another child and they're sharing the way their parents and nursery school teachers tell them to. One child has a little plastic pail and shovel. The other one has a little metal dump truck, and they fill the sand with the pail and shovel and then into the dump truck and then empty the dump truck. They're having a good time. Then at the end of their little playtime, when it's time to go, the child with the truck says to the child with the pail and shovel, "I'll trade you. You can have my truck and I'll take your pail and shovel." And the mother jumps up. "Are you kidding? That truck costs $17. A pail and shovel doesn't cost more than $5. Give that back." A little lesson that sharing is not the same as capitalist values. Also, sharing and caring is not the same as winning over other people. We now have a presidential candidate who prides himself on making money and using other people, not paying for them for their labor, lying and committing fraud in order to get a bank loan by saying that his properties are worth more than they are, disrespecting the rules, raping women so that he forces other people rather than considering their needs. That would fail nursery school or kindergarten. But that's valued in our capitalist society. He's a capitalist hero. And to some people, Biden is a capitalist hero by arming genocide, which cripples children and kills them and kills women and children. 2/3 of the approximately 35,000 people dead in Palestine are women and children, and 1 out of 10 children has no legs because they're shot. But the Israeli soldiers who shoot them and pilots who drop bombs are not thinking in terms of empathy, something totally essential to the continuation of the human race. Everyone needs care. We all need care. If you were going to teach these skills, you'd have to teach history differently. Instead of Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, you might talk about the cooks in his army, about who brought up those soldiers, who made the clothing they wear, who made the guns they carry, who created them, who brought them up to be able to live only to risk their lives. That would be a very different kind of history, the saga of humanity. Capitalism teaches us to ignore that. Capitalism has to go. We need care in order to live and survive on this earth. And we need to teach the skills of caring and maintaining life. It's crucial. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.